Well, there's two factors that drive adoption. One is continued collapse of the banking world and the way the inflating all the fiat money is driving a need for Bitcoin. So in countries where you see a lot of as you point out, El Zonte or Bitcoin Beach is ground zero for Bitcoin adoption and hyper-Bitcoinization. So people are being paid in Bitcoin, they're using Bitcoin, they're saving in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is becoming a unit of account. It's becoming really the form of money for that town and nearby towns. San Salvador, the capital, a lot of Bitcoin going on as well around the country. If you look at a heat map, Bitcoin wallets, you see high concentration in El Zonte, you see concentration in San Salvador, and then you start to see it around the country popping up every single day. So awareness of Bitcoin is extremely high. It's on the front page of the newspaper often. It's being talked about by the president often. We talk about it on our media outlets a lot. And so awareness is there. Adoption is definitely in towns like El Zonte almost ubiquitous, and so it's spreading out to other areas of the country from there. So to kind of really follow up on what's happening, we've decided to launch a new VC fund, El Zonte Capital. So this is my third Bitcoin-related VC fund. Simon Dixon and I started Bitcoin Capital, a VC fund, back in 2013, which was really the first dedicated venture capital fund at the time. And then I also started Heisenberg Capital, which has been making Bitcoin investments as well, like in Casa and Swan Bitcoin. But El Zonte Capital will be really focused on Bitcoin, hyper-Bitcoinization as we see it in El Salvador, as well as Bitcoin maximalism. So I think Bitcoin maximalism is coming into its own now. People are understanding more about what that means. And I think I'm pushing for El Zonte and El Salvador to get more formal recognition of Bitcoin maximalism. Well, Bitcoin has demonstrated that it's the only truly decentralized monetary network in the world. So everything else, whether it's fiat money, CBDCs, gold, or altcoins, are all either absolutely or relatively centralized as compared to Bitcoin. And decentralization is the unique quality that makes Bitcoin revolutionary, because it exists outside of any central control. It exists outside of any state control, of any group or corporate control, and therefore it exists as pure money. It's virtually perfect money, where the transaction value of Bitcoin is determined entirely by by the market, so to speak. So this is unique. This doesn't exist anywhere else. And it's, as such, it's pulling away from the rest of any competitor or any system that suggests that it might compete with Bitcoin. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of losers. Stefan, you've got the fiat money world is in total chaos. The dollar and the euro are really suffering epic, epoch-defining collapses. In gold, as you see, there's no real price discovery in gold. It's manipulated. It's centralized to a large degree in vast storehouses of central banks and other players. Gold is not decentralized, really, when you compare it to Bitcoin. And in the altcoin market, it's clearly not decentralized. You've got plenty of attack vectors in the altcoin market. The centralization takes many forms. Either the code base has changed often, or you've got, it's driven by a cult of personality. It's just many forms of centralization you see in the altcoin space. None are truly decentralized. The EU has come out and said we need to attack Bitcoin and support Ethereum. I mean, Ethereum is kind of the second most well-known in this space. And it's clearly not decentralized. It's clearly not money. It's clearly an exit scam, and it's clearly the pet of the central bankers around the world. It should be clear at this point, as Michael Saylor said in a Real Vision interview last year, altcoins, including Ethereum, you'd have to say that they're both unethical and immoral to support these projects. It goes beyond just failed projects. When they support these altcoins, including Ethereum, they're really acting in an unethical, immoral way. Because one of the attributes of Bitcoin is that it's unconfiscatable. That means that for somebody to build up a Bitcoin position, they can't rely on the old tried and true method of coercion or violence, right? Typically, the way empires are built or the way wealth is created is through violence and war. Countries or corporations. One of the side issues being discussed, of course, with El Salvador is that it's been the victim of American violence and CIA violence for decades because they are stealing the resources of that country and all over Central America. But this is not unique to El Salvador or Central America. The U.S. is doing this all over the world. And so violence and war are part and parcel with fiat money. So fiat money is something you can print really without constraint to fund your violence and your war. And with Bitcoin, because it's unconfiscatable, to accumulate more Bitcoin, you have to come to the market with something other than violence and coercion. You have to have something that people want to trade with you for Bitcoin. So it's inherently anti-war and anti-violence. People talk about Bitcoin using a lot of energy. The answer to that is compared to what? The fiat money world, because it supports war, because it supports the prison industrial complex, because it supports hatred and it supports fraud and corruption and media corruption. Obviously, the carbon footprint of fiat money is almost infinitely higher than Bitcoin. It's an absurdly high amount of carbon emissions associated with fiat money. By eliminating fiat money, carbon emissions would drop enormously, 70, 80%, and almost immediately, because you're getting rid of the worst carbon offenders in the world. The Pentagon, the war machine, the fraud, the corruption, the waste. So philosophically, those are some of the high level top line changes that Bitcoin can bring about once a global Bitcoin standard comes in, Hyperbitcoinisation comes in. After less than a year after making Bitcoin legal tender, the government, when threatened with another violent attack by gangs, their response was, you know what? As we're imbued with the ethos of Bitcoin and we are intolerant of this violence. So the president's gone on a campaign now to rid the country of this gang violence, which, by the way, is exported to El Salvador from the United States. So so they're cleaning up America's trash effectively. And they're doing so very effectively because Bitcoin changes the way you think. You become intolerant of violence. You become intolerant of war because you want to live a Bitcoin life. And this is playing out right now in El Salvador. If other countries and when other countries adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, they will also follow what El Salvador is doing and become intolerant of violence and intolerant of war. That's why it would be great if America became a Bitcoin standard, because they would stop their wars of convenience in various countries and focus on being better global citizens at home. Well, there's two factors that drive adoption. One is continued collapse of the banking world and the way the inflating all the fiat money is driving a need for Bitcoin. So in countries where you see a lot of inflation, a lot of money printing, like Central America and South America, Bitcoin is already making huge inroads. And then in countries where banks are precarious or central banks are failing, like in Lebanon or a couple of others, the Bitcoin awareness and adoption is moving forward. So just the collapse of the status quo is driving adoption into Bitcoin. And then the other factor that drives adoption is really the way that Bitcoin almost is a way to hack its way into human nature by tickling the greed gene. When your neighbor starts getting wealthy with Bitcoin, you want to find out more about Bitcoin. And the price, the number go up technology that's built into the protocol means a lot of people become envious of their neighbors and friends and family be getting rich on Bitcoin, and they start to check out Bitcoin. So it's FOMO plus bank failure equal Bitcoin adoption. How soon does that take place? It's because it's a technology, it's a messaging technology, and it's going through what you could call exponential growth. We are shortly going to be at that moment when you'll see what we saw in the internet days back in 1997, where it went from 150 million users and people in the New York Times were writing about maybe the internet's a fad and it'll disappear, to suddenly becoming ubiquitous. So I think it's similarly with Bitcoin, you've got roughly 150, 200 million users. We're entering a phase now where you'll suddenly see 1 to 2 billion users will be talked about as the current market for Bitcoin, and driven again by those two major pillars of adoption: bank and fiat failure plus FOMO.